When the P-38 Lightning first carved its way through the skies of the Pacific, Japanese aviators weren't sure whether to mock it or fear it. With its unusual twin-boom frame and central cockpit pod, it looked as if something extraterrestrial had drifted into the conflict. American crews proudly nicknamed it the Fork-tailed Devil, but that title actually originated with the Luftwaffe, who had already built a reputation around their fear of the aircraft. Before long, scattered reports about this peculiar fighter began appearing inside Japanese intelligence summaries. Was it truly a breakthrough, or merely another overweight, sluggish American design? From its long-range ambush tactics to chilling accounts from enemy pilots, this is the revealing truth Japan eventually uncovered. By the time the P-38 reached the Pacific in late 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service was at the height of its self-confidence. The A6M-0 had dominated the early battles, tearing through Allied aircraft in alarming numbers, and reinforcing Japan's belief in its unquestioned supremacy in aerial combat. Meanwhile, the Americans had been quietly preparing something different. Not a highly maneuverable dogfighter, but a fast, high-altitude hunter built for long-range and overwhelming firepower. Lockheed's Lightning had already proven itself in Europe as both a long-distance escort and a deadly interceptor. In the Pacific theater, its tremendous range offered the U.S. something they had been desperately lacking: the ability to strike Japanese forces far from their bases, over open water, and to escort bombers deep into enemy-held zones. To Japanese planners, this unusual aircraft was a mystery. Their entire doctrine centered on close-in turning battles, not high-speed duels fought at altitude. Early intelligence assessments dismissed the P-38 as just another large, fuel-heavy American fighter that would collapse in a traditional dogfight. But once Lightning squadrons arrived over the Solomons, pursuing Zeros from astonishing distances and returning home unharmed, it became clear that this was not simply another U.S. plane. It was an aircraft designed for a completely different style of war. The P-38 wasn't merely distinctive in appearance. Its engineering set it apart entirely. Its pair of turbo-supercharged Allison V1710 engines propelled it to speeds surpassing 400 miles per hour, a number that shocked Japanese analysts accustomed to facing American aircraft that were typically 50 to 80 miles per hour slower than the Zero. With a combat range of more than 1,000 miles, the Lightning could sweep vast sections of ocean, engage in extended fights, and still return to base. All of its firepower, one 20mm Hispano cannon and 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns, was packed into the nose, meaning every shot followed the same straight path. Unlike wing-mounted weapons that had to converge at a specific distance, the P-38 could destroy a target from far outside standard dogfighting ranges. Japanese pilots would later describe the unnerving precision of its concentrated fire. Fully loaded, the Lightning weighed over 17,000 pounds, more than triple the weight of the A6M-0, yet its tricycle landing gear and counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque problems, giving it stable handling in both climbs and steep dives. While the Zero relied on a fragile airframe that traded survivability for agility, the P-38 could absorb serious damage and still make it home, something that both irritated and secretly impressed Japan's top aces. What first seemed like a lumbering heavyweight was in truth a long-range executioner crafted for a type of conflict Japan was not ready to face. The P-38's development, however, was anything but smooth. When Lockheed revealed its radical twin-boom concept in 1937, many in the U.S. Army Air Corps doubted it. The design looked like it belonged in a future era, far removed from the biplane-influenced fighters still common at the time. Skeptics accused it of being overly complicated and questioned whether such an unconventional aircraft would ever be practical in combat. Their concerns grew once the prototypes began test flights. Early trials exposed a host of problems.
severe engine overheating during long climbs, cockpit icing that blinded pilots at high altitude, and instability in steep, high-speed dives. The Lightning was the first American fighter to encounter compressibility, a little understood aerodynamic phenomenon. When it exceeded 500 miles per hour in a dive, its controls became rigid, locking the aircraft into a near-vertical plunge. Several talented test pilots died before engineers created the dive recovery flaps that finally addressed the issue. Weight was another obstacle. With every improvement, heavier armor, self-sealing fuel tanks, increased weaponry, the P-38 drifted further away from the nimble dogfighter profile the Air Corps was used to. Some officials even recommended canceling the entire project and shifting focus to conventional single-engine fighters like the P-40 or P-39. But Lockheed refused to abandon the design. Engineers refined the turbo superchargers, overhauled the cooling systems, and optimized the airframe for stability at high altitude. Step by step, the Lightning transformed into an aircraft capable of flying higher, faster, and farther than any Japanese fighter currently in the Pacific. By late 1942, just as the war demanded an aircraft with extraordinary range and overwhelming firepower, the P-38 was finally ready. It wasn't perfect, but its unique characteristics became a critical advantage in the vast distances of ocean warfare. When the Lightning first clashed with Japanese fighters in 1942 and early 1943, the encounters were startling. At the outset, Japanese pilots treated it with the same condescension they had shown towards earlier American aircraft, expecting another easy victory, only to discover how wrong they were.
Heavy, slow in tight turns, and easily drawn into close-range battles. That was how the Zero preferred its opponents. But the P-38 refused to fight on those turns. American pilots quickly adapted and learned to engage the Zero using tactics that suited the Lightning, not their adversary. Employing classic boom and zoom techniques, they dove from high altitude, delivered devastating bursts from their concentrated nose guns, and then climbed back out of reach before the Zero could counter. The P-38's superior speed allowed it to break off an engagement whenever it chose, something that greatly irritated Japanese aces who were accustomed to trapping enemies in long, turning fights. What worried Japanese commanders even more was the Lightning's ability to escort bombers far beyond the Zero's operational range. Missions that had once left American bombers exposed were suddenly protected by a shield of P-38s clearing the airspace ahead. Reports from Rabaul and Bougainville noted that the Lightning could appear over target areas with little warning and remain there for far longer than expected. The aircraft's most famous achievement came in April 1943 during Operation Vengeance, the mission to intercept and eliminate Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. That single operation demonstrated to Japan that the P-38 was not just another fighter aircraft, it was a strategic tool capable of reaching deep into the core of Japan's wartime planning. Japanese intelligence records reveal a striking evolution in how the Lightning was perceived. In early 1943, it was largely dismissed in formal evaluations as an oversized escort fighter with poor turning capability, a heavy, speed-oriented machine that skilled Zero pilots believed they could easily outmaneuver. But within months, that tone shifted. By late 1943, internal memos carried a far more serious warning: a fast, dangerous attacker demanding extreme caution in any engagement. Pilots returning from combat described the Lightning's greatest threat as its ability to avoid traditional turning fights altogether. Its extraordinary diving speed meant that once a P-38 secured a position behind a Japanese aircraft, escaping was almost impossible. One Zero pilot wrote in his diary, "It drops from the sky like a hawk, strikes and disappears before your guns have time to respond."
The Lightning's long range added yet another layer of anxiety. Japanese aviators describe the unsettling feeling of seeing it appear out of seemingly empty sky, engage briefly, vanish into the clouds, and then reappear minutes later from an entirely new direction. This unpredictability created a constant mental pressure, forcing pilots to remain vigilant even when the air seemed quiet. By 1944, the Lightning's standing among Japanese pilots had transformed from an odd curiosity into a calculated and respected danger. It was not unbeatable. Experienced Zero pilots could still exploit its weaknesses, but it demanded serious attention whenever it entered the fight. In the view of Japanese intelligence, it had ceased to be a strange foreign design. It had become a high-priority threat and a stark reminder of the limitations imposed by Japan's short-range fighters in the immense, unforgiving skies of the Pacific. If the Lightning's engineering impressed Japanese analysts, its tactical application deeply disturbed them. Unlike American pilots early in the war, who tried and failed to match the Zero in tight turning fights, P-38 crews quickly recognized that speed, altitude, and the element of surprise were their most powerful assets. From the moment the Lightning entered Pacific operations, squadron leaders drilled boom and zoom tactics into their pilots until they became instinctive. They were trained to dive at tremendous speed, fire a short, accurate burst, and then climb back to altitude before the Zero could respond. The P-38's turbo-supercharged engines allowed it to maintain strong performance at altitudes where the Zero struggled, giving American pilots the freedom to decide when and how a fight would occur. Team tactics developed quickly as well. Pairs of Lightnings coordinated their attacks so that one aircraft could lure Japanese fighters into a climb, only for a second Lightning to swoop down unnoticed from above. Because all of the P-38's guns were mounted in the nose, these slashing, high-speed passes remained deadly even at greater distances, often forcing Japanese fighters to disengage before they could close in. To many Japanese aviators, this was infuriating. The very notion of refusing a proper turning engagement clashed with their traditional view of honorable air combat, and Lightning pilots capitalized on that mindset relentlessly.
The combination of the P-38 and the tactics built around it didn't just neutralize Japan's aircraft. It also undermined the cultural assumptions Japanese pilots carried into every engagement. By the middle of 1943, Tokyo's air strategists no longer dismissed the Lightning as a clumsy American heavyweight. They were actively analyzing how to counter it. If the P-38 altered the way Japanese pilots fought, it also reshaped how they felt about combat itself. Early in the war, Japanese aviators approached American fighters with confidence verging on arrogance. The Zero's agility and the pilot's pre-war experience had given them a sense of near immunity in the air. But the Lightning represented a new kind of threat, one that refused to follow the established script. Reports from units in the Solomons and New Guinea began to hint at growing uneasiness. The P-38's extraordinary range meant it could show up in places where no American fighter was expected to operate, sometimes deep behind Japanese lines. Its acceleration and climb performance meant that once it latched onto you, breaking away was nearly impossible. Pilots soon described a two-sided fear: dread of being caught by a Lightning and dread of missing a fleeting opportunity to engage it before it disappeared again. Modern psychology might refer to this as anticipatory anxiety. For Japanese flyers, it manifested as hesitation, a brief but often fatal pause before committing to an attack. The P-38's toughness only magnified this effect. Many Japanese veterans later recalled firing long bursts into a Lightning, watching it trail smoke as it dove away, and then realizing, sometimes with disbelief, that it was still airborne. In contrast, the Zero's lightweight frame simply couldn't withstand the same punishment. As this shift in morale took hold, even seasoned Japanese aces began choosing safer, less aggressive maneuvers, avoiding positions that might leave them vulnerable to a P-38 slashing attack. By 1944, the Lightning had become more than a physical adversary. It had grown into a psychological weight, slowly eroding the confidence that had formed the backbone of Japan's early air superiority. The P-38's legacy wasn't defined solely by kill totals, though it amassed impressive scores against both Japanese and German aircraft. Its deeper impact lay in the way it transformed aerial warfare in the Pacific. It forced Japan to confront an uncomfortable reality that in modern combat, speed, firepower, and reach could outweigh pure agility. For the United States, the Lightning proved that an aircraft didn't need to excel in every category to dominate. It needed to be paired with the right tactics. The P-38 also played a crucial part in grinding down Japan's irreplaceable pool of elite pilots, enabling long-range escorts and deep fighter sweeps that constantly pressured enemy airfields. By 1944, the typical Japanese naval aviator possessed only a fraction of the flight time that pre-war pilots had enjoyed. This decline in experience accelerated Japan's loss of control in the skies. Technologically, the Lightning influenced American fighter design for decades. Its focus on concentrated firepower, high-speed hit-and-run attacks, and pilot protection echoed in post-war jets like the F-86 Sabre and can still be seen in multi-role fighters today. Perhaps most importantly, the P-38 demonstrated that perception itself could become a weapon. The Japanese never fully recovered from the psychological advantage the Lightning gained. Even now, at air shows and in the pages of veterans' memoirs, the P-38 is remembered not only as an aircraft, but as an icon, the fork-tailed predator that rewrote the Pacific Air War. In the end, the Lightning's greatest triumph wasn't confined to the battles it fought. It was the effect it had on the minds of the men who faced it. What began as an odd-looking silhouette in the distance became a force that challenged Japanese doctrine, tested their resolve, and exposed the limits of their earlier confidence. It proved that victory isn't determined only by the most impressive machine on paper, but by the right machine in the hands of disciplined pilots using innovative tactics. Today, only a small number of Lightnings remain flyable, their distinctive twin-engine hum still drawing attention at air shows. For historians and veterans, they stand as a lasting reminder that in aerial warfare, adaptability often proves more decisive than perfection. The P-38 didn't simply participate in the war. It helped redefine how wars in the air would be fought for generations to come.